The cabin had been sitting alone for so long that most people treated it like part of the landscape. Its wooden walls were faded, the roof had a stubborn lean, and the porch creaked like it was tired of waiting for someone to come fix it. When he first walked up the path toward it, he felt a quiet pull, almost like the place was asking for someone to bring it back to life. He had always loved old buildings, especially ones with history hidden in their walls. He didn't buy places for the size or to show anything off. He liked places that had a story. And the cabin, sitting on a small patch of land just outside the neighborhood boundary, felt like a forgotten chapter waiting to be opened again, the real estate agent had told him. The cabin hadn't been lived in for years. The previous owners had moved away, and before that, it had already started to fall apart. But the land was beautiful, quiet, full of trees, with a small path that led to a clear stream behind the property. As he walked through the empty rooms during the first visit, he could imagine what the place once looked like. People sitting on the porch on summer evenings, a warm fire glowing in winter. It wasn't just a cabin. It felt like a home waiting for someone patient enough to care for it. After weeks of paperwork and planning, the cabin was finally his. The first day he arrived with tools in the back of his truck, he felt more excited than nervous. He started by sweeping the porch, clearing fallen branches, trying to see which parts of the house needed immediate attention. His plan was simple. He wanted to restore it piece by piece, always respecting the history of the place. He wasn't trying to change the cabin into something modern. He just wanted to bring it back to what it once was: strong, peaceful, loved. Most neighbors in the nearby community were friendly when he first met them. A few had walked over to greet him, curious and happy that someone finally cared about the old cabin. They told him stories about who used to live there. Small memories about kids running around, old summer barbecues, and how the cabin used to be the heart of the area before the newer homes were built. It felt good to know people were happy about the restoration. But it soon became clear that not everyone felt that way. He first met her on the third morning when he was unloading wood planks from his truck. He heard footsteps on the gravel path, and when he turned around, a woman stood there with her arms crossed tightly against her chest. She had a stiff smile that looked more like she was inspecting him than greeting him. "You must be the one who bought the cabin," she said. Not sounding pleased, he nodded politely and introduced himself, expecting a normal, neighborly conversation. Instead, her eyes scanned the property like she was checking for problems. "I didn't think they would sell it to an outsider," she said casually. Though her tone didn't feel casual at all, he raised an eyebrow but stayed polite. "Well, it had been empty for a long time. I'm happy to fix it up." Her expression tightened. "Fix it up? You mean you plan to change things?" "Because this place has history. My family has been connected to this land for generations. My father used to say this cabin was practically part of our family." He didn't want to assume anything, so he asked kindly, "Did your family own the cabin before?" Her answer came fast. "Not officially. But it was understood. Everyone in this neighborhood knows that this cabin is tied to our family. My son grew up hearing stories about it, in fact." She paused, then spoke as if she were delivering a grand announcement. "This cabin should have been my son's birthright." He blinked. "Birthright?" She nodded sharply, her chin lifting in a proud, almost dramatic way. "Yes, the land, the cabin. Everything here. You buying it without consulting the community is disrespectful. I'm on the HOA board, and we have standards. You can't just do whatever you want here." He stayed calm, even though the cabin wasn't part of the HOA at all. The property had been clearly listed as outside HOA jurisdiction. The agent even reassured him twice. He told her gently, "This cabin is not inside the HOA area. I checked the maps and paperwork."
Right.
The woman's eyes narrowed. "It doesn't matter what the paperwork says. The community spirit includes this land, and the people here respect tradition. I expect you to do the same." He didn't argue. He didn't want conflict. He simply replied, "I'm just trying to fix the place. I'm not here to bother anyone." She took a slow step closer, lowering her voice like she was warning him. "You already have. My son will be very upset when he finds out you took something that should have been his." He didn't know what to say. The cabin had been legally abandoned. No one else had tried to buy it. No one else had cared for it in at least a decade. This wasn't something he had stolen. It was something he was saving, but the woman already showing signs of being the kind of neighbor who tried to control everything didn't seem ready to accept that. She walked around the porch without permission, looking at his tools, peeking into windows, inspecting every corner like she owned the place. "These repairs look messy," she muttered. "You didn't ask anyone about materials? You didn't submit any plans? I'll need to review everything." He took a steady breath. "Ma'am, this property isn't under the HOA. You don't have the right to review anything." She stopped walking. Her face turned stiff again. "We'll see about that." Then she walked off, leaving him standing there with more questions than answers. At first, he tried to shrug it off. Maybe she was just having a bad day. Maybe she was one of those people who loved rules so much that she thought everything needed her approval. He hoped she would calm down and realize he wasn't doing anything wrong, but that hope didn't last long. Over the next few days, she returned again and again. She never knocked. She never texted or called. She just showed up like she was inspecting a job site. Sometimes she stood on the edge of the property with her arms crossed, shaking her head like she was disappointed. Other times she came right onto the porch to comment on whatever he was doing. "You can't use that. Kinda would hear that fence is too tall. That color doesn't match the neighborhood." Theme. Every time he calmly reminded her, "This place is not controlled by your HOA." But it never changed anything. She kept insisting the cabin was tied to her family and should belong to her son. She brought it up so often that it started sounding rehearsed, like she had practiced saying it. One morning, he found her taking pictures of the property. When he asked what she was doing, she said she needed evidence for the HOA board. He explained again that they had no say over the land, but she just waved him off, like he didn't understand how things worked around there. The strange part was that most other neighbors avoided getting involved. A few whispered to him when she wasn't around, telling him not to worry too much. They said she had made trouble before and that she liked to act like the whole neighborhood followed her rules. They assured him she didn't actually have the power she pretended to have. But even with their quiet support, the situation felt heavier every day. He had only wanted to restore an old cabin, not fall into some strange battle with an HOA board member who believed the land was her family legacy. Still, he tried to stay focused. He replaced broken beams, fixed the windows, and slowly brought warmth back into the old structure. Every nail he hammered felt like a small victory. Every piece he restored made the cabin look more alive. But the more progress he made, the more she showed up. And every time she arrived, she acted more confident as if the cabin somehow belonged to her. Late one afternoon, after a long day of sanding the porch floor, he sat down on the steps and looked at the cabin with tired but proud eyes. It was finally starting to look like a home again. Then he heard footsteps. The same woman appeared, this time holding a folder of papers. She didn't greet him. She didn't ask permission to come closer. She held the folder out like it was a warning. "I've talked to the other board members," she said. "And if you don't stop what you're doing, we'll have no choice but to take action. My son deserves this cabin, not you." He didn't take the folder. He simply looked at her and replied in a steady voice, "You don't have authority here. And you know your son never owned this place." She stared at him for a long moment, her expression tight with frustration. Then she turned away and said with a sharp tone, "You'll regret ignoring me." She walked off. He realized something important. This wasn't just about an old cabin. This was about control, and she wasn't going to stop anytime soon. He stood up, dusted off his hands, and looked at the cabin with renewed determination. He had bought it fairly. He was restoring it with care. And no matter how many times she claimed it was her son's birthright, he wasn't going to let fear or pressure push him away from something he truly believed in. He didn't know yet how far she would go, but this was only the beginning. From the moment the sun rose on the fourth morning, he knew the day would not be peaceful. The cabin, which had slowly started to regain its old charm, seemed to be surrounded by an atmosphere of tension. He had slept lightly, thinking about the woman who had threatened him the day before. Her folder, her tone, her repeated claim that the cabin was her son's birthright tit, all lingered in his mind. Still, wanted to focus on the renovation. He had promised himself he would finish restoring the kitchen walls that morning. He stepped inside the cabin with his toolbox, planning to ignore any outside noise. But he hadn't been working for long when he heard a loud voice outside. At first, he hoped it was just someone walking a dog or a neighbor calling their kids. But the voice grew clearer, and he instantly recognized it. It was the same woman again. He sighed quietly and set his tools down, knowing he couldn't pretend he didn't hear her. When he stepped outside, she was standing near the porch, with two other people beside her. They were both middle-aged and dressed neatly, holding clipboards like they were about to inspect a construction site. She turned to him with a self-satisfied look, as if she had brought back up. "These are members of the HOA board," she announced loudly, as if making a proclamation. "We're here to discuss your violations." He took a calm breath. "There are no violations. This property isn't part of the HOA." The man holding one of the clipboards cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, we received a complaint, so we wanted to check the situation." Before he could respond, the woman cut in. "I've already explained it to them. This land has always been considered part of our community. The cabin has special meaning." His work is changing everything. He could see the board members weren't completely convinced. They shifted uncomfortably as if they didn't want to be there. He understood. Most people didn't enjoy being dragged into unnecessary arguments. He kept his tone steady and respectful. "I have the deed, permits, and maps inside. If you want to see them, I can show you. But this property is outside the HOA boundary." The man with the clipboard nodded, almost relieved. "If you don't mind, yes. It's easier to clear things up with documents." The woman shot him a glare as if he had betrayed her. "You don't need to look at any documents. I told you everything already. My father practically built this place." Her voice rose with every word, and the two board members seemed more uncomfortable by the second. He invited them inside to see the papers, and they followed quietly, ignoring her attempts to stop them. She stayed outside but muttered under her breath about how no one respected tradition anymore. Inside, he spread the paperwork on the kitchen counter property maps. Legal boundaries, the deed, and the renovation permits. The two board members examined everything with careful eyes. After several moments, the woman on the board sighed softly. "This is all valid. Everything checks out." The man nodded. "Yes, and you're not part of the HOA jurisdiction. We really can't do anything here." He thanked them for taking the time, and they apologized for the inconvenience. As they stepped outside, the woman from the HOA who had been pacing angrily near the porch rushed toward them. She demanded. The man spoke gently, but firmly. "He's not under our authority. There's nothing we can enforce." Her face froze in disbelief. "That's impossible. You must be missing something. The cabin is part of our community history. It may have sentimental value," the woman on the board replied, "but legally, we can't interfere." The HOA woman tightened her jaw. "So you're saying he can destroy my father's legacy, and you won't do anything?" The board members exchanged a look, realizing there was no easy way to deal with her emotions. They simply thanked him again and left, walking quickly down the path as if escaping. Once they were gone, she turned her anger fully toward him. "You tricked them," she snapped. He shook his head. "I showed them the truth. Nothing was tricked." She stepped closer, pointing a finger. "You think this is over? You're destroying something sacred. My son should be standing on this land, not you." "Your son never owned this land," he said quietly. She stormed off without another word. But he knew she would return. That afternoon, he tried to work again, but the peace had clearly shattered. Every few minutes he glanced toward the path, half expecting her to show up again. The cabin walls echoed his movements as he hammered, painted, and repaired. Yet, something felt different now. The restoration no longer felt like a simple project. It felt like something he had to protect. Later in the day, one of the friendly neighbors stopped by. It was an older man who lived a few houses down. He walked over slowly, leaning on a cane. and greeted him with a calm smile. "I heard she came by again," the neighbor said. He nodded, this time with board members. The older man sighed. "She's been like this for years, always trying to be in charge, even when no one asks her to be. Don't let her worry you. The rest of the neighborhood is glad you're fixing the place." He appreciated the reassurance. "Thank you. I'm trying not to let it get to me." The older man looked around the property and smiled. "You're doing good work." That cabin was falling apart. Most of us thought it would collapse before anyone saved it. He felt encouraged by the man's words. Not everyone in the neighborhood was against him, just one very loud person. Still, the peace didn't last long. The next morning, he woke to the sound of raised voices near the driveway. When he stepped outside, he saw 2 delivery workers waiting with a truck filled with roofing materials he had ordered. And standing in front of them, blocking the path with her arms spread wide, was the same woman. "You can't deliver anything here," she said loudly. "This property is under dispute." "What?" The workers shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, we just deliver what's on the order form," she snapped. "Well, I'm telling you that you're not allowed to go any further." He hurried down the path. "It's all right," he told the workers. "You can bring it in. She doesn't have authority over this land." The woman glared at him. "I filed a formal complaint with the HOA. You can't make any changes until it's reviewed." He kept his voice calm. "There is no review. I'm not part of the HOA." The workers looked between the two of them, clearly unsure who to listen to. He pulled out his permit and showed them. "Everything is legal. Please bring the materials in." The workers nodded and began unloading the truck, driving slowly around the woman. She shouted at them, calling the delivery unauthorized. But they ignored her as politely as possible. When the truck finally left, she turned to him with a furious look. "You're making a big mistake. I'll make sure you can't keep doing whatever you want here." He didn't reply. He simply walked back toward the cabin, forcing himself not to react. She was trying to get under his skin. He wouldn't let her. For the rest of the day, she stood at the edge of the property, arms crossed, watching him work. She didn't leave, even when the sun began to set. It was as if she believed her presence alone could intimidate him. That evening, another neighbor approached quietly. She was a kind woman who lived across the street and often walked her dog around the area. She glanced toward the woman standing at the property line and whispered, "Don't mind her. Most of us don't take her seriously. She thinks she runs the neighborhood, but she only scares people because she's loud." He smiled weakly. "Thanks, I just didn't expect all this when I bought the cabin." She nodded sympathetically. "She'll probably try a few more things. Just keep doing what you're doing." As the neighbor walked away with her dog, the sun dipped behind the trees. He stood on the porch and looked at the cabin, illuminated gently by the evening light. He felt tired, but not defeated. The cabin deserved to be restored. It deserved to be loved again. And he refused to let one person with an inflated sense of authority take that way. But things only escalated in the following days. The woman continued showing up, sometimes shouting from a distance, sometimes stepping onto the property to take pictures. Twice, he found her opening his mailbox, which was a serious boundary violation. He politely warned her to stop, but she acted like she didn't hear him. One day, she even brought her son, a tall young man who looked more embarrassed than anything. She dragged him onto the property and introduced him loudly. "This is the rightful heir to this cabin," she declared. The young man gave him an apologetic look. "I'm really sorry about this," he whispered. "I don't want the cabin. I just came because she wouldn't stop talking about it." Before he could respond, she interrupted. "Don't apologize to him. He should apologize to you for taking what's yours." Her son sighed, clearly exhausted. "Mom, please, let's go home." She ignored him and continued her claims, making the situation even more confusing and uncomfortable. After several minutes, her son finally led her away. Apologizing again over his shoulder, he stood there, shaking his head. It was sad in a way her delusion had even dragged her own son into this. By the end of the week, he understood something clearly. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. This wasn't a minor disagreement. This was an obsession, and the more progress he made on the cabin, the more determined she became to stop him. He had hoped she would eventually calm down, but instead, she was escalating, becoming more unpredictable, and he had no idea just how far she was willing to go. But one thing he did know, he wasn't giving up, not on the cabin, not on his peace, not on the truth. From the moment the sun came up, he could already sense that something was different in the air. The quiet space around the cabin, usually calming, even when he was dealing with the constant tension from the woman down the road, felt heavier than usual. It was a strange heaviness, the kind that made him feel like he needed to keep looking over his shoulder. He tried to shake off the feeling and went straight to work. There was a long list of tasks waiting for him that day. The cabin roof still needed reinforcement. The porch steps needed fixing. And inside, the old fireplace bricks had to be cleaned and reset. He liked staying busy. Work kept him grounded and helped him ignore the drama that had been building around the property. But even as he worked, his thoughts drifted back to everything that had been happening. The woman had been escalating for days. She had shown up with HOA board members, blocked delivery trucks, taken pictures without permission, and even brought her son along to claim the cabin was his birthright. He had tried to stay patient, calm, and focused on the restoration, but he knew she wasn't going to stop on her own. He just didn't know what she would do next. By mid-morning, he was standing on the roof securing new shingles when he heard voices down the path. Not just one voice, this time several. Curious and uneasy, he stepped carefully toward the edge of the roof to see who it was. A small group of people had gathered near the driveway. 5 or 6 neighbors, all standing close together and talking quietly. He recognized a few from earlier friendly interactions, and some he had never spoken to. They weren't loud or angry. In fact, they looked concerned. He climbed down the ladder, wiped his hands on his jeans, and walked toward them. One of the women spoke first. "We wanted to check on you. We've all heard what she's been doing," the man added. "She's been going door to door telling everyone you're destroying community history. She even said she might get the county involved." He felt a tired sigh escape him. "I'm not breaking any laws. I have all the permits." The woman nodded. "We believe you. Most of us know how she gets. We're just worried she'll take it too far." Another neighbor stepped forward, a younger guy with paint stains on his clothes, maybe someone who worked construction. "Look, she's been telling people she's going to make sure the county shuts you down. She's saying you're violating property rules, even though this isn't HOA land. She's been calling offices non-stop. That's why we came to warn you." He appreciated their honesty. "Thank you. I knew she was upset, but I didn't know she was going around doing all this." The woman sighed. "She does this every few years. She picks a new person and tries to control everything. But this time, she's worse, because she truly thinks this cabin belongs to her family. People have been avoiding her all week. We're just hoping things don't get out of hand." They talked for a few more minutes before the group slowly returned to their homes. He felt grateful for their concern, but their warnings made him more uneasy. If she had already started calling county offices, that meant she was willing to stretch her story even further. He didn't want trouble with the authorities, but he couldn't live in fear either. All he could do was continue restoring the cabin with honesty and care, just as he had planned. A couple of hours later, while he was cleaning old paint off the window frames, he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. When he stepped outside, he saw a county vehicle parked near the end of the driveway. His shoulders tensed. A county inspector stepped out of the truck and gave him a small, professional nod. "You the owner of this property?" "Yes," he replied, trying to stay calm. "I'm here because we received a complaint about unapproved construction. Mind if I take a look at your permits and paperwork?" He felt both relief and frustration. Relief, because he had nothing to hide. Frustration, because he knew exactly who filed the complaint. "Of course," he said. Leading the inspector inside, he laid out the documents on the same kitchen counter, where he had shown the HOA board members their mistake. The inspector took time examining every paper carefully, checking dates, boundaries, and signatures. After several minutes, the inspector nodded. Everything looks in order. You're well within your rights here." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Thank you." The inspector sighed. "We received multiple calls. Whoever is filing the complaints keeps insisting this property is under HOA control." "It's not," he replied firmly. Clearly, the inspector said. "But I figured I should check anyway before this becomes a bigger mess. Sometimes people get caught in neighborhood disputes. I just wanted to make sure you're not the one causing the issue." "No," he said quietly. "I'm just trying to restore the cabin." The inspector gave him a sympathetic look. "I'll file my report and note that everything here is legal. Hopefully, that stops the calls." He appreciated the kindness, but doubted the calls would stop. The woman wasn't the type to quit easily that afternoon. While he was working near the fireplace, the sound of footsteps made him turn. She was standing in the doorway, not bothering to knock. He stood up straight. "You can't walk in here without permission." She waved a hand dismissively, as if property laws didn't apply to her. "I saw the county officer leaving. Did he shut you down?" "No," he said plainly. Her eyes narrowed. "Why not?" "Because everything is legal." She let out an angry laugh. "You must have sweet-talked him, or showed him fake papers." He took a slow breath. "Nothing is fake. The cabin isn't yours. It's not your son's. It never was." She stepped closer, her voice rising. "My father built part of this place. This land carries our family's blood. You're destroying heritage." Her words were sharp, but he stayed calm. "Do you have any proof he built it?" Her face stiffened. For the first time, she hesitated. "I don't need proof," she snapped. "Everyone knew about it. My father spent an entire summer working here when he was young." He tilted his head slightly. "Working here doesn't mean owning it." She just glared at him, shaking with anger. Finally, she pointed toward the door. "You'll regret this." "I'm not done." Then she stormed out, slamming the screen door behind her so hard that dust fell from the rafters. He rubbed his forehead and sat down on an old wooden stool. He felt exhausted, not from the restoration, but from the emotional weight of dealing with someone who refused to accept reality. The next morning, he woke up early again. He had barely slept, thinking about what else she might try. The neighbor's warnings kept replaying in his mind. The county inspector's visit kept replaying too. Even the look on her face when she realized the inspector didn't shut him down stayed with him. He knew she was planning something. And he knew he needed to stay ahead of it, so he spent the morning organizing every document he had. He made copies of everything: permits, maps, emails with the county office, just in case he needed to show them again. He also installed a small camera on the porch. He didn't want to involve the authorities unless necessary, but he needed to protect himself. Later that afternoon, while he was sanding the porch railing, he heard someone calling his name softly. It was her son. The young man approached slowly, looking nervous and embarrassed. His hands were in his pockets, and he kept glancing behind him as if he didn't want his mother to see him talking. "Talk to you for a minute?" the young man asked. He nodded and set the sander aside. "Of course." The young man took a deep breath. "I want to apologize for everything, my mom. She gets like this sometimes. She believes things that aren't real. She thinks doing this is protecting something important." His voice softened. "But she's hurting people instead." He appreciated the honesty. "You don't have to apologize for her actions." "I know, but I feel like I should. She keeps saying the cabin belongs to me, that it's my birthright." His face tightened with embarrassment. "None of that is true. I don't want this cabin. I never did." He nodded gently. "I understand." The young man looked down at the ground. "I've been trying to talk her out of this, but she won't listen to me. She keeps telling me I'm too soft and that she's fighting for our family." He let the silence sit for a moment before speaking. "I'm not trying to take anything from your family. I'm just restoring the cabin." "I know," the young man said, "but she won't stop. She thinks if she pushes hard enough, everyone will give in." He felt a sinking feeling. "Has she done anything else?" The young man hesitated. "She's planning something. She's talking about bringing more people to confront you. She said she's going to prove that the cabin belongs to us. He felt his chest tighten. How is she going to prove that? She's trying to dig up old stories about my grandfather, the young man said. But none of them have anything to do with this cabin. That made sense. She'd been holding on to a story for so long that she convinced herself it was true. The young man stepped back. I'm really sorry. I tried to stop her. But she won't listen to anyone. He nodded with quiet understanding. Thank you for telling me. Before leaving, the young man added softly, just be careful. She's not thinking clearly. When he walked away, the warning echoed in his mind. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. Every sound, the wind, the footsteps of animals. The crunch of leaves made him wonder if she was coming back with more people. By early evening, it happened. He was sweeping the porch when he heard loud voices down the path. Not soft murmurs, not curious neighbors, raised angry voices. He stood still, listening carefully. The woman was leading a group of residents toward the cabin. Some looked uncomfortable, others confused, and a few seemed dragged along against their will. Her voice carried through the air like a siren. This is our community. We can't let him destroy what our family's built. He took a deep breath and stepped off the porch, meeting them halfway. She pointed at him with dramatic fury. There he is, the man who stole my son's heritage. The man who lies to the county. The man who... Enough, one of the neighbors finally said. Sounding the days after the county meeting felt strangely calm for the first time in weeks. The air around the cabin felt lighter, as if all the noise and tension that had been hanging over the place had finally broken apart. He woke up early each morning, not because he had to deal with another complaint or another surprise visit, but because he could finally work on the cabin without wondering who might show up to stop him. It felt peaceful, almost like the land was grateful too. He spent those mornings sanding old beams, cleaning the windows that had been dark with dust for years, and scraping away the last bits of chipped paint. Every small improvement made the cabin look a little more alive, and that alone gave him energy. But even with this piece, he sometimes caught himself glancing over his shoulder, half expecting trouble to walk up the path again. It was just habit by now. A few neighbors started stopping by more often, some out of curiosity, and some just to show support. They would stand on the porch with him, admiring how different the place looked already. Many of them apologized for not stepping in earlier, saying they were afraid of being targeted themselves. He understood. He had seen how she behaved. No one wanted to deal with her. Still, it surprised him to hear how long people had been quietly dealing with her problems. One afternoon, an older neighbor told him stories about how she used to argue over the smallest things. Grass being half an inch too tall, decorations she didn't approve of, cars parked at an angle she didn't like. She always found something, and if she couldn't find something, she'd make something up. People tolerated her because fighting with her felt exhausting. But after what happened with the cabin, many realized they didn't have to put up with it anymore. The HOA meeting that had been called to address her behavior was scheduled for later that week. It was supposed to be a normal monthly meeting, but everyone knew it would be anything but normal. Even people who usually never showed up planned to attend. He wasn't sure if he wanted to go. A part of him felt tired. He had already been through enough. But another part of him felt he should be there, just to see the situation through. On the day of the meeting, the room was packed. People lined the walls, whispering among themselves. He walked in quietly and took a seat near the back, not really wanting attention. He could feel people glancing at him, some smiling at him in a supportive way, others giving him a small nod. He appreciated it. When she walked in, the room went silent for a moment. She acted like nothing was wrong, greeting a few people with an overly cheerful voice, though no one seemed eager to greet her back. She finally sat down near the front, tapping her foot quickly as if trying to keep her nerves under control. The meeting began normally, the board discussing small matters, but everyone knew what they were waiting for. After about 20 minutes, the board president cleared his throat and shifted in his seat. He announced that several formal complaints had been filed. Regarding the recent situation with the cabin, he said there had been concerns about misuse of HOA power, false claims, harassment, and attempts to involve authorities without proper cause. The room grew quiet again. She immediately raised her hand, insisting that the board hear her side first. She claimed she was only protecting the community. She had every right to step in, and that no one understood the history of the land like she did. But as she kept talking, people began shaking their heads. Some whispered to one another. A few sighed loudly. Then neighbors began speaking up. One by one, people told their own stories. Some described times she had threatened to fine them over things that weren't even violations. Others talked about how she pressured them to agree with her decisions. A couple of people admitted they had stopped joining community events because they felt uncomfortable around her. Someone else shared that she had once yelled at delivery drivers for parking on the street. Every news story seemed to take her by surprise, as if she didn't realize how many people had been affected by her behavior. She tried to deny some claims and argue back, but there were simply too many people speaking. The board listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions, and trying to remain fair. The moment that surprised him the most was when her own son spoke. He stood up slowly, looking down at the floor. His voice was soft but clear. He said he felt embarrassed by everything that had happened and that he never believed the story about the cabin being his birthright. He said he wished his mother would stop using him as an excuse to get her way. The entire room fell. Silent at his words, she looked shocked, as if she didn't expect her son to speak against her. Her face tightened, and for a moment she looked like she wanted to argue with him. But she remained quiet. After everyone had spoken, the board stepped aside for a short break to talk privately. People waited quietly, some standing outside the room, others sitting in their chairs, whispering carefully to one another. When the board returned, the president announced their decision. They said she would be removed from the HOA board effective immediately. She was also issued a formal warning about harassment and told she must not involve the HOA in matters unrelated to its authority. If she continued, further action could be taken. She looked stunned, her face pale and her hands gripping the bottom of her chair. She didn't argue. She didn't yell. She simply stood up and walked out of the room, ignoring everyone around her. Her son followed slowly, though he paused for a moment to give the protagonist a small nod. It felt like an apology without words. After the meeting, several people approached him. They thanked him for standing firm, saying it gave them courage to speak up. He didn't feel like he had done anything special. He had just wanted to restore a cabin. But somehow that simple project had pushed the community into fixing a long-standing problem. With the HOA trouble behind him, he could finally focus on finishing the cabin. The next days were filled with steady work. He installed the last windows, painted the frames, and repaired the porch steps. The cabin began to look not just restored, but almost new. It felt warm and welcoming, the kind of place someone would want to spend time in. A few neighbors came by to help, even if only for an hour or two. Some brought snacks. Others helped carry materials. It felt like the whole community wanted the cabin to succeed. One evening, as he stood on the porch looking out at the quiet yard, he realized how much had changed. What started as a simple renovation had become something much bigger. It had brought people together. It had helped clear the air in the neighborhood. And it had shown him that even when things feel overwhelming, patience and calmness can carry a person through. He took a deep breath, smelling the fresh wood and the cool evening air. The cabin was nearly done. The hardest part was behind him. And for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. The community felt peaceful, too. People walked by with smiles instead of worry. Children played outside. Neighbors talked to each other more openly. It was as if the whole place had finally taken a deep breath. After holding it in for too long, he knew there was still more to do before the cabin was completely finished. But now he could take his time. He could enjoy the work. No more interruptions. No more arguments. No more door knocks followed by accusations or complaints. As he locked up the cabin that night and headed home, he felt grateful. Grateful for the support he didn't expect. Grateful for the outcome he didn't plan. And grateful that he had stayed calm even when things felt unfair. He didn't know what the future held for the neighborhood or for the woman who had caused so much trouble. But that wasn't his concern anymore. His only focus now was finishing the cabin and making it the peaceful place he had imagined from the start. And deep down, he knew the next chapter of this journey would be brighter than anything that had come before. The last few weeks of restoring the cabin felt different from everything that had happened before. The noise, stress, and constant interruptions were gone. Now there was only the sound of tools, the wind brushing through the tall trees, and the peaceful rhythm of steady work. It felt like he could finally breathe again, and with every day that passed, the cabin looked a little more alive. He liked coming early in the morning. When the air was still cool and the sun hadn't fully risen, the light would hit the old wooden boards in a soft, warm glow, making the cabin look almost magical. He would stand there for a moment, coffee in hand, just taking it all in. For the first time since buying the place, he didn't feel tension in his shoulders. He felt calm. Finishing touches were all that remained. The inside had been cleaned, repaired, and polished. The outside had fresh paint, new steps, and sturdy window frames. Even the roof, which had once been a disaster, now stood solid and neat. Still, he wanted everything to be just right, so he took his time. A few neighbors dropped by during the final days. Some came out of curiosity, others out of kindness. They would bring small things like cookies, drinks, or even a bag of nails they thought might help. But more than anything, they brought conversation. They talked about how different things felt in the neighborhood. Some said they felt safer. Others said they finally felt free to decorate their homes or plant flowers without worrying about someone complaining. One afternoon, a couple who lived 2 houses down stayed longer than usual. They shared how the community had felt tense for years, but no one wanted to start a fight. They said that the cabin project, without meaning to, had encouraged everyone to speak up about things they had been holding in. The neighborhood already felt closer. People greeted each other more. They helped each other more. They didn't walk around on edge. He listened quietly, surprised by how much impact a single renovation had created. He hadn't planned any of this. He had just wanted a quiet place to restore and enjoy. But somehow, his peaceful approach had helped bring peace back to others too. It was strange but meaningful. A few days later, while he was putting up the last pieces of trim near the porch, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and saw her son, standing a few feet away with his hands in his pockets. The young man looked nervous but calm. He walked closer and said he wanted to apologize again. He said he felt bad about everything his mother had done and wished he had spoken up sooner. He said he hoped things weren't awkward. He assured him there were no hard feelings. He understood that sometimes people got caught in situations they didn't want to be part of. The young man looked relieved. He even asked if he could help with anything. The two ended up working on the last section of the porch railing together as they worked. The young man shared small things about himself. How he loved fixing things too, but didn't always get the chance. How he wished his mother would let go of the past. How he felt responsible, even though he hadn't done anything wrong. He listened and nodded, offering simple words of comfort. Sometimes that was enough. When they finished, the young man stepped back and smiled softly. He said the cabin looked beautiful and that his father would have appreciated how much care had gone into restoring it. Then he left quietly, thanking him again before heading down the path. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual, knowing it was finally the day the cabin would be complete. He spent hours cleaning up leftover scraps, sweeping the porch, wiping down windows, checking every corner to make sure everything was perfect. By the afternoon, he took a slow walk through the entire cabin. He moved from room to room, running his fingers along newly restored door frames, feeling the smoothness of polished wood, smelling the faint scent of fresh paint. Every room felt warm and welcoming. He paused in the main room, looking out the window as the sunlight filtered in. This place had once been dark, abandoned, ignored. Now it felt whole again. It had a spirit to it, something gentle and quiet. He opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. A few neighbors were gathered down the path waiting to see the finished result. They waved when they saw him. He waved back, feeling a mix of excitement and relief. As they came up the porch steps, they reacted with surprise and joy. Some smiled wide. Others let out small gasps. A few walked around the cabin slowly, taking in every detail. Like they were exploring a piece of history brought back to life. They complimented the warm wood, the restored windows, the clean roof lines, the smooth porch. One neighbor said it looked better than it had looked decades ago. Another joked that the cabin was lucky to have found someone patient enough to save it. He stood quietly, a little embarrassed by all the attention but grateful for their kindness. He explained some of the work he had done and how he had tried to stay true to the original feel of the place. They listened with interest, nodding and asking questions. Someone suggested the cabin should be added to the local community guide as a historic highlight. Another person said it should be used for small gatherings or storytelling nights. It was a sweet idea, and he didn't mind. The cabin wasn't just his project anymore. It felt like it belonged to the whole neighborhood. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, he sat on the porch alone. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft colors. The trees stood tall and quiet around him. The cabin glowed gently in the warm light. He thought about everything that had happened, how something simple had become complicated, how unexpected challenges had come his way, how he'd been pushed, tested, and doubted. But through it all, he had stayed calm. He had stayed patient. And somehow, that patience had helped reshape an entire community. He thought about the woman who had caused so much trouble. He didn't feel anger toward her anymore. If anything, he felt a little sad. She had been holding on to something that wasn't real, something that came from pride or fear or loneliness. He hoped that losing her position in the HOA would make her reflect. He hoped she would find peace too, but whether she did or not was no longer his concern. What mattered now was this moment, this quiet evening, this cabin that had gone from broken to beautiful, this neighborhood that had gone from tense to connected. As the sky darkened and the first stars began to appear, he leaned back in his chair and let the cool night air wash over him. He knew he would spend many evenings here, listening to the soft sounds of the forest. Watching the light change through the windows he had restored with his own hands, he didn't need recognition or praise. He didn't need anything more than the peace he felt now. The cabin stood strong beside him. It's no longer a forgotten structure, but a place full of life again. A place rebuilt with care. A place that carried memories of the past and hope for the future. And as he closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the fresh scent of wood and earth, he felt grateful for every part of the journey, even the difficult ones, because without them, he wouldn't have ended up here. In this quiet moment, in this restored cabin, in this small corner of the world that now felt like home,